The Booksecutioner. A librarian who is good at weeding books from a library collection. A definition from the Urban Dictionary. At the top of my list of tasks I hate to do is weeding books from the collection. Unfortunately, it turns out I am actually good at it. I detach and become ruthless and cruel when removing items from the collection, but I still hate to do it. Weeding books is not a job for a hoarder, and since I'm a bit of a minimalist, the job usually ended up in my lap. When I started at the Barkman Library, we had a collection of 75,000 items in a branch library that should have had 40,000 items at most. The librarians who preceded me ignored previous weeding lists. The first directive from Kathy Knox, the public service manager who hired me, was to start weeding the collection. Our shelves were filled to the max at that time, and the poor shelvers had no room to shelve books and other materials. To clarify, weeding is the process of removing items that rarely circulate. Our weeding lists were usually set to 1 year. If an item had not been checked out in a year, it would appear on a weeding list for us to pull. In terms of the Pueblo City County Library, we tried to repurpose the books we weeded. Most of our weeded materials ended up at the Friends of the Library bookstore and were sold to the general public at a discount. Weeded paperbacks that were worn out were discarded. Since paperbacks had a limited life and limited resale value, the library policy was to throw the badly worn paperbacks away and recycle them. One time when I was throwing a load of worn-out paperbacks into the recycling dumpster, a patron in the parking lot saw me. He approached me and asked me why I was throwing out books. I explained that we were getting rid of our older paperbacks that were falling apart. He didn't really believe me, and I had nothing left to say except that I was just following orders. I spent almost 5 years as the manager of the Barkman branch, and I estimated I weeded 75,000 items from our collection. Since we added 5,000 to 10,000 new items a year to the collection, I needed to weed at least 20,000 items per year to reduce the collection to a manageable size with 35,000 remaining items in our collection on the day that I left. Although I did recruit staff and volunteers for the weeding effort, it was difficult to find any librarians who wanted to pull books and other items from the library. Every week, I filled a dozen used Baker & Taylor boxes with books and sent them to our friend's bookstore. Our monthly list had 1,000 to 1,500 items, and I sighed in horror every time I got a new list. Especially if we had not finished our last list the previous month and we were getting behind in weeding. "I am become death, the conqueror of worlds," was the poem that Robert Oppenheimer quoted after witnessing the Trinity atomic blast. My quote was, "I am become literary death, the booksecutioner of a library collection." I take credit for inventing the word booksecutioner. I personally submitted the word to the Urban Dictionary, and the editors accepted it. So it is now on their website. My advice to local authors or anyone who loves a particular book is to check it out 2 or 3 times each year. That way you can ensure your favorite book or item does not end up on the death weeding list. Unfortunately, the day came that I found one of my favorite Bradbury books on the weeding list. It was Fahrenheit 451, written by Ray Bradbury on a manual typewriter in the UCLA library. Although I took pride in my job at being an efficient booksecutioner with very little mercy, I trembled at the thought of weeding a book by the most significant author in my life. To make matters worse, it was a worn-out used book in paperback form, which meant it would end up in the dumpster. Fahrenheit 451 is Bradbury's masterpiece about people risking their lives to save books in a fascist future, where all books are burned. It would have been an abomination to trash Fahrenheit 451 in the Barkman recycling dumpster. It was like God asking Abraham to kill his own son. I just could not bring myself to do it. Although the statute of limitations for stealing this book has passed, I waited years before confessing to my crime. At the end of the workday, I wheeled out my weeded and worn-out paperbacks on a small cart. I had learned not to throw out any books in the light of day, since I had been confronted by a patron the last time I was caught. Since we left the barcode on the books we weeded, the security gate lit up like a fireworks show as I passed through it with my pulled paperback books. It caught the eye of our security guard, and I coolly explained I was just throwing out a cart of weeded books. She had seen me do this hundreds of times before. I probably could have told the security guard almost anything, and she would have believed me since I was the branch manager. Fahrenheit 451 was on the top of the card as I pushed it out the door. Once I got outside to throw out the paperbacks, I deftly palmed the treasured book in my right hand. Since the recycling dumpster was by the parking lot, I verified no one was looking, and I unlocked my car and threw the book on the front seat. I felt it was my duty to honor the book people in Fahrenheit 451. History will look back at my effort as being heroic rather than being criminal, even though I stole a book from the Pueblo City County Library District. To this day, that paperback with the barcode and security tag torn out still sits on my bookshelf, just like a prize trophy would. The Booksecutioner blinked and pardoned one very important book. Ray Bradbury died on June 5, 2012. When I heard the news, I was at work in the Barkman Branch Library. I withdrew to my office, closed the door, sat at my desk, and cried quietly. It was appropriate that I mourned his death in a library, because the library was Ray Bradbury's place of worship for most of his life. That summer, I read his book Dandelion Wine for the 45th time. His wonderful book transported me back in time to Greentown, Illinois, and allowed me to spend another summer with the best friend I ever had, Douglas Spaulding, the character Ray Bradbury modeled after himself.